Alright, let's begin this the third in our series of pods. And with me I have my dear board colleague Markus Modin, who actually wanted to follow us to Almedalen but who couldn't.
Yes, thank you for letting me be here. It's a pleasure to be with you as always.
You're always welcome. We are a part of the same family.
Thank you.
Right. So what our viewers might be interested to hear would be that we have finished the biodome. The eternal biodome is finished, and I'm very happy that the project finally is over and that the urban gardeners have gotten their dome.
Indeed, well done. Very good.
Well, and then you're of course very curious on hearing about the Almedalen trip.
Yeah, and maybe before that you can briefly explain, perhaps for those who are visiting us from abroad, who don't really know what Almedalen is, can maybe explain a little bit about what that event means and so on.
What that event means is that it's the largest, within quotation marks, democratic event in the world. And it's basically to make themselves more accessible for the people. Swedish political leaders are holding speeches and rallies and seminars every year in Almedalen, Visby, Gotland. And for those who don't know, Gotland is an island outside of Sweden, and it's not the easiest thing in the world to move up to that island.
Yeah, so generally speaking then, how would you describe the sort of mood and the populace there and the topics and so on?
Smaller than last year, but it's not an election year. And then a lot of people did not go there because there were a lot of Nazis there last year. And then I'm not speaking about general right-wing populist conservative parties. I mean Nazis.
The literal kind.
Yeah, and they were here this year as well, but it rained so much during the beginning of the week, so the Nazis spoke for the seagulls.
Right.
Yeah, regarding this, we did not encounter any Nazis. We were exhibiting our tent and our material on Thursday, and it was an extremely windy day, so me and another EOS member from Uppsala had to strap the tent into 2 park benches we appropriated for that purpose.
Ingenuity saves.
And we got a lounge.
Oh, that's cool.
Yes, yeah. And we talked with about, I would say, 100 people. Some of them were semi-celebrities and some were just in the general public and some were teens.
Great. On the topic of conversation, what was the primary thing you wanted to let people know about and see what their reactions would be about? And how was the conversations? What did you...
People came to us and asked what we were, and they suspected we were some kind of company because there were a lot of for-profit companies there, and then a lot of people were friendly. Some of the people who were least friendly were surprisingly enough older Green Party members who often spoke quite nihilistically. They thought the biggest problem was the population pressure on the world, and they ignored the fact that Sweden has 5 times larger population pressure than Ethiopia, for example, in terms of consumption. If you look on how many earths would be needed if everyone would live as a typical Swede today in resource consumption.
It seems like it really misguides the subject when we put the population density at fault, when it's the resource management and the utilization of resources basically that determines how the populace impact the environment.
Yes, very much. Everything is really a maths game. Then I can tell one fun anecdote of what happened after the event, because we went to the camping and stuffed our stuff into the headquarters, the mobile headquarters. Anyway, we were moving towards the city from the camping when we encountered a very drunk man in his 60s. Yes, and he had a question to us three.
It was deep and profound, is my
Yes,
guess.
yeah, the question was, can a stolen tool be stolen again? Because what he had done was that he had stolen a tool used to cutting wires and similar, and then someone else had stolen it from him.
Okay. All right, so apparently a thing can be stolen a couple of times then.
Yeah, and according to Swedish law, that is correct, because Axel, the EOS member from Uppsala, he studies law.
He literally had to check it out.
He knew that he had done
Okay,
an exam about that recently, I think. So basically, and then the old man came with another question, and that was that he was leading a bike alongside the road, a lady's bike. He had apparently stolen it from one of his mom's neighbors.
By the means of a tool, perhaps?
Yeah, by the means of the tool that got stolen.
Okay.
But anyway, he had later found a cell phone in the bike, in the basket in front of the bike, and afraid of being tracked, he had snuck away to the beach and then buried the cell phone in the beach.
Oh.
But now he was thinking that maybe he hadn't stolen the cell phone, because he never knew it was there. So it had followed with him by mistake when he stole the bike.
That's an interesting mindset with a terrific rationalization. Okay.
Yeah, but apparently he can leave it to the police without being accused of stealing it. So he could breathe out. So we were the most dramatic thing that happened on Gotland was that we met a real bike thief, a professional bike thief.
It's very rough in Sweden, apparently. I see. Okay.
Yeah, we should really. It was a shame since Pippi Longstockings got retired.
Yeah.
But the subject today is really about education.
One of my favorite topics.
Yes, and I think that we could begin with the practical terms about how education works today and how education would work during a technate. And the design actually has an entire chapter devoted to education.
Excellent. We'll make sure to provide that in little footnotes to the episode afterwards.
We'll make it accessible, could make it accessible as an article as well.
That's a good idea.
Yeah. The key element of education under a technate, as suggested by my predecessor, Dr. Andrew Wallace, was to, instead of having classes, having subject-specific blocks.
Blocks? How do you mean?
Blocks. So, for example, let's say that you are really good at language, but you are really bad at maths. Then, instead of having to either make a class twice because you failed very hard at maths, or move onward to next class with a failed maths grade, you are taking the time you need to pass the maths, and you're taking a quicker time to pass the language. Or if you're worse at language, you are doing simpler language tasks with maybe more advanced math tasks. But because today, as it is working in most schools, students are needlessly actually crushed when they are not given the intellectual tools to master one specific subject during one specific year. Let's say that you fail division in maths. You don't understand division. And then you pass an entire year without understanding it. And then next year you're doing more advanced maths dependent on division. But you do not understand that maths because you do not grok the fundamentals of it. And grok is a word invented by Robert A. Heinlein for his novel Stranger in a Strange Land, and it means basically to fully understand what it is you should understand.
So So you can say that it's to see how one specific subject connects to other subjects. So it's really to make the connections that is kind of lacking. You get to learn division, but you don't see its application in other fields, for instance. Is that kind of what you're
Yes,
saying?
and I've had that. I'm working as a teacher right now, substitute teacher, really a political scientist, but working as a substitute teacher right now. And what I've seen, for example, is that a lot of students in higher grade, like 7 to 9, now we're speaking about students who are 15 years old, they don't understand how to measure volumes because they cannot measure areas. So they cannot even process areas. But if they are retaught how to process area, then it's quite easy to upgrade them to understand volumes. So my strategy as a teacher when I'm between four eyes with a student who don't understand is to try to go back to the level where they understand mathematics and then lead them up to a level where they could learn the new stuff. And I think that is very important. There was also a case with a young girl who understood English. She was from an English-speaking country, but she couldn't understand Swedish math questions because they were on Swedish. So I remade the maths test into English for her, basically.
Is that something you frequently encounter as a teacher, that the very language you're using is not the best approach to get the student to the answer, basically?
The worst case was with a student who was in 9th grade, and what happened there was that he did not understand the language, neither Swedish nor English, and he should be taught maths, and he could not read on his own language even. And then we are speaking about a real trouble. So he was doing like maths with addition and subtraction, plus and minus basically, and couldn't get it right. He guessed.
I mean, frankly speaking, it seems like a major problem that the students are not beforehand placed in a social context where the language is shared. I mean, that very fact is a major disruption in the classes, and as a teacher you have to be so, I mean, I'm just gathering from conversations you and I had before, like a multidisciplinarian. You gotta be like a social worker, a therapist. You sort of have to take a lot of different kinds of things on, and if you're dealing with multiple different people with different languages, you basically don't stand a chance. And no matter how gifted you might be, and other teachers are, if you can't teach in one language that unifies all the people in the room, it's really difficult. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think can be done to maybe clarify that process so that there is one language to teach in common? It's a major issue, and I don't really know how to work through that aside from transcending political correctness.
I'm going to answer with a counter question. And is it before or after the technate we are talking about?
Let's try to look at how we currently could maybe impulse or encourage changes that would make sure that people can be taught in a common language.
Well, I actually think that the best way to increase the amount of learning is to destroy the basis for teaching.
I think I understand what you mean. Maybe you can expand what you mean by that, though.
Humanity has seen intellectual expansion every time we have had a revolution of information. Let's say the earliest proto-civilizations, they had no written language, which is why we have very little traces of them. We don't know anything about them. We had one very advanced civilization in Moldova before the Sumerians. We call them Tripilians. They had cities with 50,000 inhabitants. But we don't know anything about them because they had no written language. We don't know what gods they had. We don't know anything about their history. We don't know anything about them really, other than what archaeology could tell us. For such a civilization, if you are the big boss, the chief, and you want another person 30 kilometers away to do something that is rather complex, how do? Well, you send a third person with a good memory and good feet to run 30 kilometers to that other person and divulge the information. And then that person runs back and comes with another set of information to you, but the memory might not be perfect. Then you get stone tablets with written language. They must be copied for hand. You know that during the Middle Ages, monasteries were actually the wealthiest buildings in Europe, the wealthiest places in Europe. And you know why? Because every document had to painstakingly be copied for hand. And that was what monasteries were doing. And this is why when we invented the printing press, monasteries became peripheral in terms of European culture, whereas the real culture moved out to libraries and bookshops, because now you could copy 150, 250 books per day and sell them out. And I see actually a trend, and I think we should, as an organization, help to move that trend forward. And that is with putting educational information out online in forms of lectures, lecture series and similar in a structured manner. So like a person could move from like very early level of schooling, preschool and similar, up to university level and get updated information.
So in a way, quantifying the process by structuring the material, basically.
Yes, and that would basically make current physical schools and universities not obsolete, but it would diminish their actual importance when it comes to, let's say, spreading information. Because what they are doing, partially, is not that they are spreading information, they are constricting information. Because let's say an old school lecture at a university, it's at a specific time on the day. Let's say that you as a student, you have had a leak in your apartment the night before. You are very tired. It would have been better for you to have the lecture afternoon the next day instead of the morning time. Or conversely, maybe better to have it another week because you went ill and similar. But you're constricted by the fact that it is occurring on a particular time. And the question is why we insist on doing that, because there is just one benefit with real life lectures, and that benefit is that you could ask the lecturer questions, but otherwise there are very few benefits with that.
I think the timing of pursuing specific subjects is really important. And I think, for example, to illustrate the point I want to make, is, for instance, when we deal with very dense subjects such as mathematics or physics, for instance, to put the student in a state that increase the probability of concentration, focus, and being relaxed. Many people tend to consume information more effectively if they are in a relaxed state. So if you think at physical exercise, for instance, when you should introduce physical exercise, you think, for example, in the morning. And then after that subject, you go with some pretty dense, more challenging intellectual work, because your mind is kind of quieted and stable because of the exercise. So that's an example to think about when we're dealing with the timing of certain subjects.
So I don't see universities becoming entirely redundant. They will still be hugely important because they will conduct research still. Then they will test students in some manner or similar, but the actual education can increasingly become accessible outside of the classroom, everywhere, every time, so as long as you have an internet connection.
What do you say then to those people who think that, for instance, schooling and at university level as well is useful in terms of learning to be like learning social cohesion better? Because if your education is not bound to specific geography, because you have ability to access the material in a structured way with access to a guiding example like a teacher or mentor through your telephone basically, do you think that how would you put those people at ease that think that if kids don't go to school they lose out on a lot of valuable social cohesion skills?
I would say that one could structure society in such a manner to teach valuable social cohesion skills. Also, I would say that schools often actually are brutalizing children quite extensively, because what we are doing is that we are putting human beings inside a building where the only thing they can do apart from sitting in classrooms and be fed information is to socialize with one another while not being allowed to leave the building. If you are going in like up to high school level, you are not allowed to leave the building during school time. Yeah. So the effects of that, it's basically, in the worst case scenario, it is creating prison behavior. So a lot of the bullying we see at schools is not natural human behavior done under healthy circumstances, but rather behavior done as a way of easing tensions and taking time and similar, getting out aggressions on other people.
So like a reaction to the environment, and the environment, if it is forcing you to be in a place you actually don't want to be, it's kind of like environmentally impulsing a sense of being trapped, not being heard, understood, or cared for. So in that sense, I really think there's a lot more to say about creating this kind of psychology of feeling trapped. And to provide some context maybe for the listener and a little bit why I really feel passionately about the subject. I used to ditch school in order to read books, and I really felt that what I wanted to learn about for myself was a more sort of accurate baseline in terms of what should have been guiding my education. And if you're forced, it really is a way to reduce the passion and the care for a certain subject. And so being able to adapt and adjust the education to really accommodate the individual based on where he or her is at, I think is very crucial, because it certainly doesn't fit everyone at the moment, and it probably don't fit anyone, but we have been using it anyway for a long time.
But here comes the big stuff with putting educational programs online, and that is that it matters very much for people in impoverished countries, because today we have countries where there is no schooling. We have countries where schools are very low qualities, where the public toilet for the students is a bucket behind a tree and similar. We have schools where we have countries where 70% of youth are like illiterate and similar, and still we have an information revolution going on. So like 50% of Nigeria's population today have access to the internet through cell phones and similar, and even people who can't really read or similar have access to it. So it could really reduce the cost of a comprehensive education. And yeah, and you know about these old edutainment programs like Sesame Street and Fem myror är fler än 4 elefanter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, we can produce such programs, and we can make them on like Swahili, on Dari, on Somali, on a lot of other languages, and then put them out on the internet, and people in these countries could use them to learn and write, but also to learn about advanced physics, advanced mathematics, black hole theories, fusion power, transhumanism, well, basically everything. And this is one thing that I think that schools are killing. Schools aren't feeding curiosity, they are often killing curiosity. Look at like 7-year-olds who go to school. They ask questions all the time. They're curious for everything. They want to learn and know everything. And
then they stop.
Yeah,
but
when the teachers become angry because the students are asking questions the teachers cannot answer.
When the questions are literally being punished.
Yes, and this is teaching the most valuable lesson for the life, that you should outwardly pretend that truth matters, because truth is in this case rather a concealment for social cohesion. Our entire society is built on doublespeak. We should pretend that truth matters, but here is the caveat: truth is not rewarded in our society, social cohesion is.
Yes.
And there are issues which we are not supposed to talk about, and issues all societies have these characteristics, though in lesser or more degree, and you get rewarded for towing the line, but you don't speak about the line. The first rule about the line is that you don't speak about the line, and the line does not exist, except that it does.
Yeah, it would be an interesting subject in itself to perhaps introduce in schools, the subject of truth, let's say, because without it you are at an extensive disadvantage with respect to your education. There are certain truths like facts don't really care about feelings, and many others, but if you would introduce that concept into the current and collectively accepted structure of schooling, it would collapse upon itself. So it's very difficult to commit a subject like that into education. Naturally, everyone speaks about it, specifically in scientific contexts, that without truth you can't get anywhere and so on. But it really isn't lived in all domains of education. And I thought about that often as I was growing up, as I'm sure you did too, and probably many of our listeners, that it really is the one thing that defines your ability to execute, to create, to do, to have impact. If you don't have the truth, there's nothing you can do. And I think Elon Musk actually said that, as I think about it now. So how can you arouse like an interest in truth without creating this massive disruptive effect in school? Because it's really difficult to challenge the current model without in some way creating a lot of dissonance and discord. Once again, how could we get that point across? How can you implement it? Anyway, the subject of truth. Do you think we could introduce truth as a subject or as a principle in the education system as it is currently, or do we have to create a whole new foundation based on the truth?
There it is interesting because I'm actually in for the first line.
Okay, how so? How do you mean?
I think that schools, rather than just teaching formal knowledge, because formal knowledge is accessible everywhere, should primarily learn out ways of structuring that knowledge and learning what matters. If you look at, since the 90s here in Sweden, with the event of the internet growing and everything, and now when that discussion is up again, they have discussed how to teach source critique, how to see what source is reliable and not or not, and like our teachers are dealing with material which says that they should teach the students that state television is reliable and that huge mainstream newspapers are reliable, while other media are not reliable. But that is not actually teaching source critique. It is just saying trust these people and don't trust these people. And it is not giving the students tools to ascertain what is truthful and what is not. It's just saying trust daddy, trust mommy, trust society. And I'm very thankful because of one teacher I had in high school who had this task we were given each week as a homework for the weekends, and that was to read 5 newspapers and read the article about the same stuff in 5 newspapers and see how they were describing the event. So we were given 2 mainstream newspapers, a socialist and a liberal newspaper, and then we were offered the opportunity to read the article in a hardline communist newspaper, an anarchist newspaper, and a far-right newspaper.
Excellent.
Yeah, and then compare and discuss why these newspapers were taking on the angle they did when they wrote about the stuff. And I think that is important. But I also think that it is important to build up the ramifications for rational discourse, that students from an early age should learn how to structure an argument.
Can I just before that give a similar example to yours that served me pretty well? I was taught by an old man. I used to steal apples from his trees. It was a neighbor of mine, this old, very gentle man, and he caught me stealing apples, you know. And then he said, you can come for apples anytime you want. And that was the beginning of sort of relationship. We used to talk about life and stuff. And he said, you should primarily listen to people who are the living proof of what they speak. And that is a very sound principle, speaking of set the ramifications for like a good discourse, or the framework for a good discourse. Listen to people who are the proof of what they speak. I thought that was a good principle.
Yes.
Indeed. But so, any other ideas about how you can set up good frameworks, such as that example, to make people really, to increase the chances for discerning the truth of a matter? What are the things that keeps people from noticing the facts about a certain situation?
Social cohesion, fear, reward, and similar things that shut down your rational mind, which is mostly when actually, and this is how children work and how children biologically should work, because since children are small for a very long time compared to other animals, and they tend to be quite vulnerable, they need to trust their parents and adults, who therefore have the greatest responsibility in the world. Small children are almost biologically programmed to obey adults, which is very dangerous actually in our society. So what we can do is that we could try to vaccinate them against the authority bias, because I want to really speak about what I'm speaking right now because it's implied. But like, if you're put into a situation where a lot of adults are acclaiming a parent figure with allegedly perfect characteristics, who is seeing everything that you do and will punish you for your thoughts and deeds when no one can see you, then you are put into a situation where you are encouraged to turn off the rational part of your brain. Like, why would such a perfect parent figure care so much about just you? You are once again put into the position of a 3-year-old and reduced to that level. And it is discussable if we really grow by being reduced down to a child level.
This reminds me of something I wanted to also get into this podcast. One of my friends said that it would be a wonderful idea to teach children about parenting, because it would have to emphasize how authorities impact children, and that in itself is a vast subject that is inherently going to bring about a lot of like dissonance and conflict. But if children really were to begin at an early age applying themselves to the perspective of the parent's role in the direct and indirect influence upon their consciousness and thus behavior, it is interesting because I talked about this point with a lot of people. Most think it's probably like not a good idea, it seems, which I found strange. You also have to factor in naturally that there's a vocabulary condition of a child that can't really integrate maybe all that sort of those implications of how those behaviors affects and so on. But I would argue that you can also advance a child's vocabulary at a very early age so that they could process those kinds of implications and concepts. So,
I would say that I'm not an expert on childhood psychology, but what I observed and what I read is that the critical ability to think is not starting to really properly develop before after age 10 in most children. Like, most children below that age has the level of understanding that of course they can make up things and similar, but like when they are argumenting for a thing, then like a child says, I want that fruit, and I ask why, then they answer because I want it, while an adult wanting that fruit would try to make up objective reasons why they should have that fruit rather than applying to their ego, because we need to lie and appear as more altruistic and more objective than we are in order to get what we want, socially speaking, in this society. Really, a lot of the things that we develop is the skill to try to manipulate others, and one can speak what they want with. I'm slightly amused by this nature of things.
Yeah, I'm not a child psychologist either, and I'm not I haven't had any scientific training or any such thing, or evolutionary psychology or so forth. But I do think that vocabulary, a very expansive vocabulary, as early as possible would definitely improve the child's ability to comprehend more dense subjects at an early age. And I think there are many living examples of children who learned quite extensive things early on. But it depends on environment.
You know that here in Sweden, I have actually seen papers from social services saying that they should investigate how capable a parent is of having a child on the basis that the child's vocabulary is too advanced for their age.
Oh, Jesus. So there's a lesson, don't learn too much early on.
And that's really a quite scary prospect. If I don't know if that is a policy for Swedish social services, or it was just for that office, or if it was just a fluke, or if it was just a scapegoat for another thing which was unuttered in that case. But the idea that children should not excel and that they should keep a baseline for their age is actually quite scary and quite retarding if being put into practice. Because what we are speaking of is to try to stifle creativity and the ability to move onward.
I think that reminds me of responsibility as part of a curriculum, for example, and the tendency to underestimate how responsibility in itself teaches a lot of valuable crafty skills. And I know a lot of people might differ in terms of thinking that, like I said, in a way, a child should be a child and shouldn't have to consider worldly matters and all of that.
I seriously know one adult, and you know him as well, who believes that children cannot think.
Cannot think.
Yes, and that makes them superior to quotation us men. Because he's also convinced that women do not think. Yeah, so ignorance and wishful thinking tends to be very spread out.
But back to responsibility as part of a curriculum. I heard about this teacher, and you probably heard this even from me before, but John Taylor Gatto, who instructed a couple of kids to do specific tasks of responsibility, and he gave them little quests and missions that were designed to develop leadership skills. So, for instance, he gave one of the kids a job to infiltrate a building. I think it was, I don't remember which newspaper, I think it was like the New York Times head building or something. He said, you need to find the boss of this building. He's somewhere in there. And you need to get him to see that you could provide some value. And I think that's like a really cool example. It's a bit mischievous, but little missions. And this depends on a lot of circumstances and the conditions of the situation, like the kids' current level of understanding and even courage and so on. But I think to give that task to like an 8-year-old kid,
it's too early for an 8-year-old kid. Yes. Is my opinion.
But let me tell you what the kid did. He got a hold of the CEO, got into his office, charmed the hell out of him, and this kid is today, this was many years ago, some kind of lawyer, and incredibly successful apparently by those conventional standards. I don't know the depth and the breadth of his well-being or whatever, but the funny thing is that the fact was that the kid actually succeeded in the task, and he was not belittled, talked down to, and this is probably an anomaly, or it was the creation of an anomaly. And I think that really is worthy profound consideration. It's not like in New York, the New York Times head office, and to navigate that, he was given, to be fair, for the example, more specific instructions in terms of how do you get what you want. Well, you treat people very well, you speak to them the way you want to be spoken to, and you use tactful ways to express yourself. And he was given a whole spiel about how to do this, but I think that giving objective goals that demands very unusual kinds of efforts at an early age can be very beneficial as a concept to explore in school today, so that there is something you have to do to achieve something. It's not just memorizing a bunch of data and repeating it. You have to execute on specific instruction and data you get, and then you evaluate and you assess to make kids more able to do things.
I agree. And here's one thing. There is, in Swedish schools today, there are basically 3 religions: Minecraft, Roblox, and Fortnite. And all 3 of these online platforms, if we are going to look at them positively for once, are teaching cooperation skills, creativity, and planning, and to some extent leadership skills. And they are apparently giving students something which school has a difficulty giving. So even when it comes to teaching out knowledge subjects, like instead of like, and this is included as a moment in Swedish schools. Instead of just me educating the students, I give them material so they can prepare their own lectures for a class the age below them. But take that a step further. Create online platforms designed at learning children how to process information and deal with information and maths issues and similar. There are all of these absolutely fascinating escape room games which are available for free online.
What does it mean, escape room games? Is it like a sandbox setup that you have to hack yourself out of, or what do you mean?
Some of them are, but most of them are like you find yourself inside a room, math questions and similar, logic questions and similar. You need to answer them before unlocking keys and similar, find the right holes for the keys.
Solve problems to progress through a story or
yes,
mission. That's what gaming is about in many ways, and it really speaks to a natural sort of grit in people to figure stuff out. And I think those 3 platforms, I call them platforms, not games. Minecraft and Fortnite, for example, is particularly interesting as it is much like a social platform. It's not just gaming, it's so much more than that. It's like an international platform wherein you can, communicate, connect, participate, cooperate. It is so cool that you brought that up, because it gives a good example of how this point about not being tied geographically or being geo-bound to a specific location like a school in order to develop, cooperational skills and things like that. And I would argue from my own experience, I like to game sometimes, and that I learned a lot map navigation and similar kinds of things through playing video games. So, I mean, I'm sure you can design video games and different kinds of simulations to guide the student or the kid or the grown-up through specific circumstances and events that will test decision-making, patience, concentration, and ability to connect dots. And I think there's a lot to be said. I'm not going to keep it too long, but for how we can utilize principles of gaming to create various simulations that will really provoke the intellect in a very constructive long-term way that create leadership skills.
Yes, and this will also facilitate the development. So we have 3 characteristics for the education of the future. And the first characteristic is that we move the classroom into the telephone. The second characteristic is that the school itself should develop leadership, discipline, the ability for logical reasoning and arguments, and the ability for critical thinking rather than simply information intake. Swedish schools are trying to do that, but it's very, very difficult. It's like a fish going up on land and trying to develop legs.
Yeah, and we also have one problem with that. If we would make schools more accessible through, phones or tablets or whatever it will be in the future, still, should the parents leave the kids at home? So I think there's something to be said about, let me just finish the point, of keeping schools as a place that you could come if you want. Your friends are there probably. There are a lot of, healthy, constructive ways to be in school and playgrounds and stuff. But to keep a place where the parents can leave their kids basically is still going to be necessary in terms of how the system is currently.
The third thing will be gamification of the schools to design the curriculum in a way that activates the reward centers of the brain, not stifling them. But if we put this into the context of the technate, we will get even further in development. Because like you said about parents staying home and similar, In the Technate, since production will be reduced because we will only produce things when people are asking for things, we will have a larger pool of available people because labor times will go down. So we will have one group of people who are looking after the young. You will have one who looks after the older, and often they will switch sides and similar. So we will have 4 communities are ecologies and similar. Also, how buildings are designed in the future will be more about like saving water, saving energy, similar. So we will have one building with habitats, hospitals, education centers, distribution centers of goods and services, and recreation centers and similar. And then most projects that are worked on will be organized like research projects and will yield some knowledge. So every human being will be trained in understanding the world through the scientific method, because it's the least worst method we have to understand the world. And then people who don't want to live in such habitats could live like in single-use houses and similar. The world doesn't need to be uniform, but the baseline will not be like divided and zoned cities like today, but integrated units. And this would mean that, for example, children and youths will be tasked with like learning about stuff by doing, and by doing quests, both in virtual worlds and in the real world. Together with adults, we will still have teachers, of course. The learning material will be available through the internet, and this will be frequently upgraded. So we won't have any of these bottlenecks which school books and similar are, and the matter of fact that you need to be in a place, because otherwise, like if you're studying business economics and you get sick for a week, let's say that you were eating on a Thai restaurant with a friend while preparing for a minor test, and then you get sick with food poisoning, and you lies down for a week, you have nearly lost your entire course, and maybe you have lost that entire future you were planning for, just because you missed 5 lectures.
Yeah, which reminds me of some interesting trend at university level. I perhaps shared it with you before, but there was an instance in, I think it was America, where a couple of students had a live Google editing document that was utilized in the lectures. Like the whole class was in real time, as the teacher were, speaking and lecturing about the subject, they were verifying everything she or he, I forget if it was a professor or professoress, but ended up a whole bunch of data that showed where she was wrong, what assumptions were made, and it turns out that through this cooperative collective intelligence gathering process, just utilizing Google and a live editing document in a group, they created basically a new lecture that was vastly superior to her or him, the professor's lecture. And I think that's a really cool example of what needs to take place to just teach material that is outdated in itself is a major issue. And it is so we have to let the children or the students design the material, because they should not get material as completely as conclusions, but as this is current assessments based on what the faculty currently has been able to put together. But naturally we should within reason, of course, you shouldn't maybe challenge physics too much and such things. First order principles are good to have, but it gave me a lot of inspiration, and I thought a collective intelligence gathering process like that in a class was excellent. And there was additionally some kids or students who couldn't be in the class, but they were at home and they were looking at this live feed of critique at the lecture, and ended up learning a lot more. So, you know, that's a very cool example of the change that is busy happening.
So what we can do to facilitate a positive outcome is to make structured information more accessible, but also investigate methods and tools to help children and students to improve their critical skills. And I have one very bad example of critical skill development. They were testing it in the school I was going to in like the interior of Västerbotten, because we had a new kind of class which was not civics but like civic orientated, and then we were going to arrange the classroom in a circle of chairs because we all were equal. Wait, it will become better. It will become much better. Then we would have a topic, and that topic could be racism, bullying, environmental destruction, equality, gender equality, and everything like that. And then students were encouraged to discuss what they thought about these topics. And sometimes it happened that students went against the script and, for example, spoke for bullying. We are speaking about 11-year-olds. Those speaking for bullying were sent out from the classroom.
That's a valuable lesson taught then.
Yeah, and that class doesn't learn anything about critical thinking skills. It is just learning that critical thinking and opinions are the same thing.
So the message is, this is a version of democracy, and it means be nice or get out. That seems to be the sort of...
Yeah, and it doesn't really teach anything valuable.
How to deal with adversity, how to deal with things you currently don't understand, how to treat disagreeable aspects based on your current impression of a thing. I mean, it basically teaches you to shut the door on something that is problematic, and that is incredibly limiting. Yeah. It is a logical fallacy that people will have to pay for. And yeah, it will create a ripple effect in the way people participate in the system.
Yeah, but I like to be contrarian, so I would like to defend that as well. Because shutting the door and silencing certain voices and silencing the right of certain voices to be heard can be effective for the stability of a civilization. Let us again return to the information revolution during the late 15th and early 16th century, when the printing press came. Before the printing press, you had to copy everything for hand or send a document to a monastery which copied everything for hand. Let's say that you wanted to be real edgy and contrarian during that period, and you authored a document denying the Trinity, and then you wanted it sent to a monastery. They wouldn't copy it because it was against Catholic dogma. So we had like heretics before, but the heretics only got regional rebellions. But during the early 16th century, we had Martin Luther, whose 95 theses were spread around all of Europe in basically 1 year. And then it was impossible to stomp out. So what we got was like the collapse of civilization, because ideas spread out very much. And we can see that the states introduced censorship and state-controlled printing presses to curb out any dissenting voices. For the printing press probably not caused, but made the peasants' wars, which killed 2 million people in Germany during the 16th century. And then the 30 Years' War, so bloody, the 30 Years' War killed 10 million people. And it is actually quite likely that platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, and similar could help to cause the collapse of societies and civil wars and genocides, even if the benefits of having a free flow of information outweighs the setbacks. So there is a very dangerous situation when bottlenecks are disappearing, because bottlenecks are fixation points where society could control the flow of information. And now we are in a landscape we can't really manage.
Yeah, I'm not really sure about all of that, but it seems like what determines outcome to a large extent is the distribution of information, as you hinted on. Hardly hinted, but basically talked about in terms of education and the third world. So, who is channeling or directing the flow of information, and for what purposes, and where is very relevant. And when there is platforms that gather a lot of information, it is basically a creation of like a powerhouse. And so there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that type of control and direction of information. And it's a very big subject, probably a little bit too big for my comprehension, but it does seem that there needs to be more awareness and responsibility in terms of how to direct information. So when you said that some people need to be quiet down, not literally how you said it, but because they can have a very disruptive and negative impact on the greater good. Maybe you can like elaborate a little bit more, give like an example, maybe that bully, or
I can give
because it's like it's right and it's wrong. And this is one of those contradictions that people need to be able to think about, because life isn't completely black and white. But it would be very helpful for the listener, I think, if you can give some like examples of that, because it can be easily misconstrued.
I can give 2 examples. And the first one is in general how the subject of religion is taught at schools, because the subject of religion is generally taught with the line of making all religions which are currently practiced throughout the world as similar as possible. And that is because we have a multicultural society. We have students who are professing different kinds of faiths, and if one would focus on things that are separating the faiths, like the literalism with which the faith is interpreted, like if religious laws are going to govern society or not, ideally, and similar, then it could precipitate conflicts between the communities, because students would be taught that they are different and thus they would fear one another more, but there was also become more social pressure. And this is not really effective, because a lot of students with different values are taught these values at home, and then they know about these values as well. So I heard one girl, when I was teaching religion, and the students were taught, one of the moments was that they were going to sit and read a segment in the book, and in one of the group rooms 2 of the girls were sitting and reading about religions together, and in that book it says that religion instituted equality between the sexes, between men and women, and that girl said, but it isn't so. I'm a member of that religion, and women are less worth than men in that religion. So the problem there is that there are other sources of information, and the material is built a bit around wishful thinking about how reality ought to be, rather than how it is, because reality is multifaceted. The other example is like, let's say, should it be, recently there was a man in the United States who went to the Supreme Court because he was fined for a document he put up online. And the document was an instruction manual about how to 3D print and assemble an automatic rifle. And here comes the scary bit, and that is that technology is multiplying our power exponentially. Soon hand grenades can be produced. There was one guy who made here in Sweden who made a nuclear power plant inside his kitchen using 110 fire warners. And then there's also the issue of like biomedicine and biogenetics. If one person would
print out like a virus, for example,
print out a virus and cause a pandemic, so, and that would create need for monitoring, but more than monitoring, it will need
control.
Not control. Monitoring is a form of control. It will need a sense of community, a renewed sense of community and purpose, because with our power we can definitely transition the world towards sustainability, but then we need to stop thinking in terms of tribe, nation, and similar. We need to see all of humanity as one big family and see that we have a common purpose on this planet, and that is a
integration,
yes,
social integration, which
yes,
relates to the
yes,
education process we've been talking about.
Yes, and that will not be 100% effective, but I believe that we are approaching a great filter which can destroy our civilization, and that filter is coming within this century.
When you say filter, are you referring to like political correctness aspects of society or the dissemination of information? What do you mean by the filter?
A great filter is basically a mass extinction event. It's a challenge. Let's say that a great filter could be like the oxidation process when 99.9% of life died out. It could be the Permian, Triassic, Siberian traps. 98% of life died out. It could be the meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs. 75% of life died out, and so on. And yes, and today we're heading towards a great filter, and I believe that we should be aware that this filter is coming. We should not deny it, but we should not give up. We should not lie down and rot. We should take our drill and pierce through that great filter towards the heavens. That's my opinion, and that is why we need to organize humanity. We need to structure information, and we need to teach people critical thinking skills. We cannot keep information hidden from people. We need to have it in the open, but we can equip people with data, with knowledge and experience, so they can deal with the information, organize, and get us through this great filter.
Absolutely. And I think on that note, we should give the listeners some things to think about, and we should maybe do a follow-up and look more perhaps practically and specifically about how could an alternative curriculum look that could benefit the human race and our ability to honor life and create peace on the planet and in ourselves.
It should also be noted that members are welcome to donate to us through our website eosprojects.com under the button of Join Us. And if you are joining the EOS, you can affect the outcome of the entire future for mankind. Have a nice day and see you all. Bye.
Thank you very much for listening. See you soon. Bye.